Hello and welcome to Placing People First, a Next Phase podcast celebrating innovations in life sciences. And today's conversation is with AJ, who's the Director of Venture Development at the Pioneer Group, a leading investor in European life sciences ecosystems. So hi AJ, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi Steve, great to be here today.
Excellent. No, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So at Next Phase, we partner with a whole range of different scientific organizations. So we work with innovative startups within the pharma and medtech, biotech, and advanced therapy sectors. So today's discussion is going to explore the current landscape of UK science parks, the different ways in which scientific organizations can benefit from working within a collaborative ecosystem. And so to begin with, AJ, I mean, you've got a very, very impressive scientific education. It was a PhD in clinical medicine. I mean, your career could have gone in a number of different directions. So could you tell us, what was it that led you in the direction that you've gone in? So can you tell us about your passion for supporting scientific innovation and what took you down that more entrepreneurial path?
Sure thing, Steve. I'd love to say that it was all forethought and foreplanned and figured out from the start, but it was very much not the case. First and foremost, I was driven by a passion for science and for innovation. And I started with an undergrad in neuroscience at UCD, went on to do a master's, as you mentioned, and then a PhD in clinical medicine in Trinity. However, as I sort of continued along the traditional academic career path, I realized that this wasn't something that particularly enthused me. The idea of grant writing and leading a research group that would be working on one very esoteric topic for the next 30 years was not something that got me particularly excited. But what led me down the entrepreneurial path? Well, that was actually quite accidental. So during my PhD, I got the opportunity to work in a spin out. So I did my PhD in Trinity College in Dublin, and as part of the doctorate, you got the chance to do various internships. And one of the internships that I did was in a spin out company from Trinity. It was a biomedical spin out, developing novel technologies for studying cancer metastasis. I went from concept to product. So I joined this team of 9 people. They were biologists, they were engineers, they were physicists. And they developed this new biochip, and I was responsible for creating the biological applications for that biochip. And I went from concept to product in 4 months. And I found that experience exhilarating. And I thought to myself, my goodness, not only do I get the chance to do cutting edge research, but then get to see it translated into real world applications. And it was from that moment that I realized that interface between the research world and the commercial world was where I really enjoyed, involving myself and exhibiting my skill set. So post my PhD, I knew I wanted to work in startups. I knew that was where my passions would lie. So I moved from Dublin to London to join initially a commercial or rather a corporate-backed biotech accelerator called One Start. And then I joined a startup that came through that accelerator called Desktop Genetics. And they were at the bleeding edge at the time. So it was applying machine learning to a technology called CRISPR genome editing. I sort of describe it as molecular scissors, these programmable molecular scissors that allows you to cut and edit DNA. And if you know that there are certain diseases that are responsible or rather if there are certain genes that are responsible for certain diseases, you can edit those genes and you can correct those mutations. So pretty exciting space to be in. Sounds like science fiction, but there are actually diseases today, beta thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, that are being treated, and we would expect, hopefully, approval of new treatments using the likes of genome editing to treat beta thalassemia and sickle cell anemia. So incredible technology having real world impact. So yeah, like I said, I worked in that company. I was head of sequencing services, so I spent a lot of time partnering with pharma companies that were moving genome edited assets into the clinic. And Desktop Genetics eventually got acquired. It was bought by a cell and gene therapy company. I was then recruited into BioCity, as we were known at the time. And the reason I got excited by BioCity was that it was really the only organization in Europe and one of the few organizations globally that was, at the time, combining these elements of an accelerator, incubation, and investment. And I thought to myself, certainly while I was in Desktop Genetics, we always felt that we were in a bit of a silo and we weren't part of an innovation ecosystem that, felt like a cluster. And the opportunity to join BioCity and lead and develop something like that was very appealing. And then BioCity in 21 was acquired and merged into Pioneer Group, which is where I am today. So, maybe from this vantage point, looking back, it all seems like it was fairly sequential and sensible. But at the time, it was really just going after the things that excited me the most.
Well, that's great, isn't it? And that's really inspiring for people to hear. I mean, some people will go into an academic career and they maybe aren't sure of the different possible paths they could go down, but you follow your gut instinct. I mean, it sounds like having that experience of working within a startup business, you were able to maybe see beyond just the science and think, okay, well, what's the commercial potential here? Which, dare I say, is maybe not something that every scientist has that understanding of the bigger picture. So that sounds really, really exciting. There's something I'd like to delve more into. Maybe we'll come back to this in a bit as well. Is just before Christmas, we had on the podcast, we had Martino Picardo from Discovery Park in Sandwich, and he used some similar terminology to what you use there around the innovation ecosystem, and that sort of spirit of organizations getting together, being able to build partnerships, be steered in a direction that maybe they wouldn't necessarily be able to do themselves. So I'd be really interested to understand your take on that. But I guess to begin with, let's delve a little bit more into the Pioneer Group. So can you tell us a little bit more about exactly what it is that the Pioneer Group does and the various different programs that you have in place that might support someone who maybe has an idea, they have a concept, but they don't necessarily have the lab infrastructure or the finance or the entrepreneurial know-how to actually make it into something?
Sure thing. So Pioneer Group, founded in 2021, is a leading investor in European life science ecosystems. Okay. So we currently own and operate, I believe it's over 12 sites across the UK and Ireland. Those sites have an asset value of over £1 billion. They encompass currently about 300 companies, occupying almost 4 million square feet of lab and office space across the UK and Ireland. So quite a large footprint. And our mission is to create environments that help companies tackle the biggest challenges in human and planetary health. And we do that through three core activities. So firstly, running venture building programs that help founders build breakthrough life science ventures. And that's the side of the business that I lead, and happy to delve into that and discuss that in more detail. The second aspect of what we do is making investments. So we have a venture arm to our business, and making investments into the most promising of these ventures to help with their technical and commercial development. Mm-hmm. And then the third arm to our business is providing the lab infrastructure and the curated community. And going back to your point about an innovation ecosystem, the community that you're surrounded in plays such a pivotal role in accelerating the growth and increasing the likelihood of success for a company. So those are the three things we do, and we view them as very much being synergistic to creating that innovation ecosystem to tackle the biggest challenges facing our world today.
Excellent. So, and yeah, I appreciate it. Each of those three things, they're all interconnected. And so your main focus personally is on the accelerator program, if I remember correctly. So that's the first of those three that you just mentioned.
Correct.
So could you maybe talk through, if someone was to approach you, or you were to identify someone, and that initial conversation starts to happen, what does that accelerator program look like, and what kind of guidance and support can you provide to a company as it's just getting started?
Sure thing. So our venture building programs are really designed to support founders along their entrepreneurial journey, from idea all the way through to hopefully an exit, or potentially even public listing and becoming a large organization. And they're sort of broken up into, these programs are broken up into three distinct phases, depending on stage of development of that company or that organization. So the very earliest phase is our accelerator program, which you've referenced. And the accelerator program is an 8-week program where we typically work with ambitious founders with novel science, hoping to tackle big societal problems. And what's often the case is those founders are often so focused on the science, they haven't really thought about what the commercial application or what the route to market for that science looks like. So the accelerator program is designed to help them figure that out. It's an 8-week program where we really sort of challenge the commercial viability of that product or service and help them develop a robust value proposition. That means understanding who's their customer, what problem those customers have, how big are those problems, and does their solution actually solve that problem, right? Because that gives an indication whether or not you're creating value. So that's the first phase, is the accelerator program. The next phase then is what we call our launch program. This is a little bit more in depth. It's a 12-month program. We provide 3 days a month of support. And it's really focused on helping founders embed those robust value propositions into investable business models. So now that you've got an idea of what the commercial viability of your product or service might be, how do you then create a business model that can attract investment and that you can execute with confidence? And that's what we spend up to 12 months working with founders and with teams to develop and hopefully gain investment. And then the final stage or the final phase of our venture building support is in our scale up program. So post investment, how do you continue to develop the company? How do you scale the company? How do you rise to the challenges of things like creating a company culture and hiring effectively and leadership, effective delegation, and expanding into new markets or developing new products or services. So all of these additional elements for a scaling company, we help and support them along that journey as well.
Great. So how do people get to meet you in the first place? Is it you advertising yourselves so that people come to you, or are you scouting for new startups or spin outs yourself? Like how does that relationship typically begin in the first place?
Sure. So typically, we've built extensive relationships with universities over the years. So we now interface with over 30 universities across the UK and Ireland, where we support researchers and founders of spin-outs or potential spin-outs coming out of these universities. We have relationships with grant funding agencies like Innovate UK. So, for example, we are the exclusive partner for Innovate UK for their iCure life science spinouts, and we support life science spinouts from an iCure program, which I can describe further if you're not familiar with it.
Yeah,
where we take up to 10 companies a year and support them with the launch program to then unlock private investment. So it's either through the likes of our university relationships or our relationships with grant funding agencies. As much as I like to get out and about, I also have a team of people that support me, that also get out and about and go to events and go to conferences. And then we have an investment team that also are meeting companies that might suggest them attending our accelerator and taking part in that to then build up an investable proposition. So multifactorial approach to identifying opportunities. And of course, doing things like this, going on podcasts and getting the word out and hopefully piquing people's interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what do people kind of need to have as a minimum to at least start that conversation? Like, do they need to have some form of initial business plan, or is it more just a sort of summary of the science that they have? Because, as you said earlier, they've not necessarily got that, they haven't necessarily formulated what their business is going to become yet. So what would you kind of expect from them at the very, very beginning of that process to at least start that conversation?
Sure. So I guess what we would expect is that they're a founder or a team with ambition, that they're a founder or a team that have and exhibit critical thinking skills and emotional intelligence, because a lot of the time what we focus on our accelerator is actually invalidating a lot of the assumptions that they think they have about their future business.
Yeah.
There's a line that we use on our program, which is everything you think you know about your business is an assumption waiting to be tested.
Yeah.
And you've got to have some openness to that, right? And you've got to have that critical thinking ability and the emotional intelligence to realize that actually you might have been wrong in your assumptions and to pivot and test new assumptions, right? And what I always say, it's better to do that now than do that in the market. It's better to do that before you've raised any money than when you're trying to execute on a business plan that, may have been doomed from the very beginning. So, for us, those are critical characteristics. Another element, of course, is that there's some really exciting science. There's really novel, innovative science that seeks to solve a big problem in society, either on planetary or human health perspective. So those would be some of the core aspects we look for when we're deciding who we want to work with.
Great. I'd be really interested to understand as well, because the 12 science parks that are currently ones under your remit, they're spread across the UK, and I just wondered whether is there a competition with the sort of Golden Triangle? You think about some of the very, very well established, highly reputed, globally recognized Golden Triangle areas, but a lot of the places that you are in are elsewhere. So is there maybe a difference in approach? Is there almost a bit of a competition with some of the more established or Golden Triangle parks to attract this kind of business? Just be really interested to explore that a little bit further.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's more collaborative than competitive. So yes, there are more established ecosystems, the Oxford, Cambridge, Londons of the world, but they pale in comparison to the Boston, Cambridge, and San Francisco's of the world, right? So I think there's a recognition that yes, those are great ecosystems, but they still have their gaps. They still have their challenges. And actually, the only way the UK competes with a Cambridge, Massachusetts, and a San Francisco of the world is nationally, right? Because that talent pool has to be drawn from nationally. And the innovation often is a case where you can collaborate with technologies being developed in other parts of the country, or you can partner with institutions that are based or have expertise in other parts of the country. So you have to have a national outlook and viewpoint. And for us, the 12 campuses that we have create that national footprint, right? And actually, when we look externally and we think about the potential for inward investment, that national footprint is actually very attractive. So what do I mean by that? We recently launched an initiative. We launched it last year called the Golden Ticket Initiative, where pharmaceutical companies, so multinational pharmaceutical companies, will essentially sponsor early stage biotech companies to be based at one of our sites for a year. So they get a year's free incubation at one of our sites. And over the course of the year, they get to build a very close relationship with that pharma company, no strings attached. So it's a hugely beneficial opportunity for early stage biotechs to gain insight from expertise within pharma, as well as have an incubation space paid for a year. Mm. So it works really well. But part of the reason why the likes of Astellas and AbbVie, who we launched the initiative with last year, partnered with us was our national footprint. Because to them, they're excited by the research and the spin-out potential from across the UK, because no individual location can really provide the deal flow and the density of spin-out activity that they can get excited about when compared to the likes of, like I said, the East and West Coast of the US. So that national footprint is actually an advantage for collaboration, an advantage for accelerating innovation, and an advantage for bringing in an inward investment into some of the companies that are based in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, thinking about the concept of an open innovation ecosystem, when I was having that conversation with Martino, we were talking very, very much around Discovery Park, and we were talking about, somebody might have a particular business that's set up on the same campus as others, so therefore they might literally go down the corridor and they can go and talk to somebody who can actually fill in a gap for them, and they can say, well, okay, we'll collaborate on this project. And so there's that openness, but that was very much within one site. So it's interesting hearing you talking about not necessarily seeing it as one individual site, but actually collaboration across the UK and into Ireland. So on a practical level, how well does that work in reality? How do you facilitate that sharing of knowledge and that promoting of it as an open innovation ecosystem across multiple sites?
Yeah, we came to the realization that it wasn't something that you could do passively. It was something that you needed to do actively, and that would have the biggest impact in the organizations that are based with us. So we've invested in doing that actively. We actually have a member of our team. Her name is Miranda Nags, who's responsible for fostering that collaboration and engagement and interaction between companies based on all of our campuses. Mm-hmm. So she meets with senior leadership in companies at different sites. She gets an understanding of, what they're doing, what their ambitions are, what their technologies are, where their gaps are, and she's able to connect the dots and facilitate that interaction and engagement to great effect. A quick example is actually when we launched our new facility in Dublin, in Ireland, which actually is where I am today currently. It's a facility in South Dublin, a place called Cherrywood. One of the first members to join this community is a company called Inventia Life Sciences. They're an Australian VC-backed biotech company that were setting up a European base. So they had raised 25 million euros. So in Australia, they wanted to set up a European base, and they chose Dublin as their base for expansion. It just so happened, so Inventia, what they do is they're a 3D bioprinting company. So they print organoids for drug discovery and drug development with a particular focus in supporting pharmaceutical large pharma drug discovery and drug development. And they have a fairly prominent engagement with MSD as an example. So it just so happened that at the same time that Inventia were moving in, someone had got in touch with Miranda about a European-wide consortium that was being put together that was looking to recruit 3D bioprinting companies to be part of a consortium.
Okay.
So as Inventia were moving in, Miranda was informed that, look, we've got this Australian VC-backed 3D bioprinting company. And she was like, well, maybe they might be interested in this. Similarly, we have a bioprinting company in Nottingham called 4D Materials. Similarly, we have a 3D organoids and modeling company in Scotland. So she was able to draw the dots and connect the dots between the different companies that are based in different locations and bring them together to be part of this European-wide consortium, which they've actually gone into. And funnily enough, Inventia actually placed one of their instruments in a top institute in Germany as part of this engagement, so that they could try out the technology and see how fit for purpose it was for their needs. So that's a really sort of live case example of that open innovation ecosystem and that active facilitation and engagement of collaboration across different sites.
Yeah, that's an amazing example of actually it coming off. And I had a really interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago with a chap called Nuno. He's the CEO of a company called Reflection Therapeutics. And so they've been going for a couple of years, but they're still very, very much a startup. And it was interesting that where some companies have aspirations to grow internally and they say, right, okay, we're 4 people at the moment, but we want to get ourselves up to 20 in 2 years' time, whatever. Their business model seems very much based on actually we're going to be outsourcing this, we're going to operate a virtual model, which means that partnership with third parties is essential. And he was saying that because the technology is so much more advanced, and because companies who are, in that sort of, if you're in that relationship with a CRO or a CDMO or whatever the third party might be, that they're more technologically capable now. That actually, if you get this particular grant, you get yourself a 10 million investment, 20 million investment. If you try and do everything yourself in-house, you're going to be spending at least a third of that on just your staffing, your lab equipment, which is going to depreciate in value. And then suddenly you've used a fair chunk of your investment. You can't actually then do a lot of the things you want to do. So it's interesting to think, okay, well, if you go out of your way to build partnerships and maybe work in conjunction with an organization like the Pioneer Group to help facilitate that, make that happen, there are organizations out there already doing some of this stuff that you can work in collaboration with them. And I mean, it's amazing to actually hear a good example of where something like that has come to fruition. And yeah, what an amazing thing to actually start that up and see it become a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, we have 15, I believe, CROs in our ecosystem.
Okay.
That's a fantastic example of how we can facilitate and engage companies, biotechs that are looking for that kind of expertise to advance in a lean and efficient manner, their various programs. It's one of the most fascinating aspects of biotech sector in the last decade or so, this sort of proliferation of service businesses that support drug discovery and drug development that are helping to drive down the sort of hurdles and barriers to starting a biotech company, whereby it's much more viable with, much smaller relatively amounts of capital to start getting proof points. And start illustrating that actually, this mechanism of action or the pathophysiology of a particular disease can be effective and can be targeted in a way that can lead to a clinical readout. It's a really exciting part of the field. We've seen it now in the small molecule space where, CROs, one of our CROs is a company called Signature Discovery.
Oh, yes.
One of our prime examples of how we support companies over a long period of time. They started with us as a team of 4 people. They're now a team coming close to 700, and they're still based with us. But their bread and butter is small molecule drug discovery and drug development. That's a space now that's really well developed from a CRO perspective. We're now also seeing biologics more and more being outsourced. And I'm actually familiar with Flexion Therapeutics. They're in the advanced therapy space, so cell and gene therapy. And we're now starting to see CROs and CDMOs cater to that modality and that sector as well. So, it's there's no better time, I guess, to be in this space, which is really exciting for folks like myself that want to support founders that are trying to tackle those health challenges.
Yeah, amazing. So one final question for me, and thank you so much again for your time today, AJ. Given how much things have advanced, your PhD, you finished that 10 years ago. We were talking earlier about how much technology has advanced now. Suddenly, these things that were science fiction 10 years ago, and certainly way before that, are now actually, they are a reality. So fast forward another sort of 5-10 years from now, what would you say that things are going to potentially look like, particularly in relation to the science parks, particularly in relation to things we've talked about today? Like, what things do you think we might start seeing more of or less of over the next few years?
My gosh, yeah. What does my next 5 years look like? Let me look into my crystal ball here. Firstly, so if we take a step back a little bit, obviously the economic conditions right now are challenging, and I think there's been a reaction to that, and where people feel like there's going to be a pullback in life science innovation because of that. I disagree with that mantra. Yes, we are in the middle of a down cycle, but I think the long-term prospects of life science innovation look very positive for many of the reasons that we've talked about before. There's a proliferation of technology. There's a proliferation of talent that want to create companies rather than just do research. There's a proliferation of service providers that want to enable the development of these technologies and support their growth. And there's a proliferation of infrastructure providers that can actually enable and unlock this growth, ourselves included. So, I think that we're actually at the crest of a huge wave. We're probably, one of the things that, maybe this is an easy out, but you look at Boston 5 years ago, and 5 years from now, I think that's where we're going to be at, right? If you catch my drift, I think there's something like, I don't know what the exact figures are, but something like 60 to 70 million square feet of lab and office space in the Boston, Cambridge area alone. UK is a fraction of that. Yeah, so it shows the opportunity for growth. It shows the opportunity for the proliferation of all of those elements that I talked about previously. And ultimately, we're living in a golden age of science, and we're living in a golden age of biology. And I think that there's just going to be more of that to come.